I want to start by making one thing very clear. I am not someone who believes in ghosts. The idea has always interested me, sure, but I've never believed they were real. I also do not usually post things like this. That is why my profile picture is a joke, and my background is full of video games. But what I am about to share felt like something I needed to put out there, not for attention, but for clarity, or maybe some kind of explanation. This happened last year, sometime between September and October. I cannot remember the exact date, but what I do remember very clearly is going to sleep that night, like any other night. Before I continue, I should explain something about myself. I am a very heavy sleeper. I mean that literally. Loud noises do not wake me up easily. Something extreme could happen around me, and I would probably still be asleep. But that night, that was not the case. I woke up suddenly at exactly 4:40 in the morning, not slowly and not confused. I was instantly awake because I felt something heavy pressing down on my chest, heavy enough to force me out of sleep. When I opened my eyes, I was completely shocked. There was a woman lying on top of me. Her face was only inches from mine. Her eyes were open, and she was staring directly into my eyes. I do not think I need to explain how terrifying that moment was. It was the single biggest scare of my life. My heart felt like it stopped completely. Instinct took over, and I threw myself out of the bed, pushing her off me. This is the part that still bothers me the most. Any dream or nightmare would have ended right there. I would have woken up fully, but this did not end. I felt her body leave mine, and I heard it hit the floor. It was a real sound, a dull and heavy impact. I turned on the lights immediately. My hands were shaking. I reached under my bed and grabbed something I keep there, a makeshift tool I built for protection, just in case someone ever broke into the house. That is when I saw her again. She was already running down the hallway. Suddenly, she stopped and looked back at me. Her body did not turn. Only her head did. It rotated farther than it should have been able to. Her eyes locked onto mine. As she moved farther into the hallway, the light gave me a clearer view of her face, and that is when I felt a different kind of fear. She looked exactly like my sister. Not similar, not close, but exactly like her. I started yelling my sister's name as loudly as I could while chasing the figure down the hallway. My parents woke up because of the noise. The hallway is not very long, and it only took a few steps to reach the end. When I got there was nothing. She was gone. The first thing I did was check my sister's room. She had not moved at all and was in a deep sleep. I do not believe for a second that it was actually her. We have a healthy relationship, and there was no reason for her to do anything like that. After that, my parents and I checked the entire house, every room and every closet. There was no sign of anyone else being there. No doors were open, nothing was missing, and there was no explanation. I want to be very clear about something. I do not believe this was my sister. I do not believe it was a ghost, and I do not believe it was anything supernatural. I am a Christian. I do not involve myself with anything dark, and honestly, I do not even believe those things exist in the way people describe them. However, I also cannot deny how real it felt. I had never had an experience where I woke up and felt something with my own body and my own hands that felt alive. You hear ghost stories all the time, but how many involve actual physical contact? For context, I do not use substances. I am healthy, and I do not have any mental health issues. Aside from ADHD, I sleep fine now, and I do not obsess over this experience. But since that night, I sleep with my door closed. If you do not think this was real, then you are like me. I did not think things like this were real either, until something happened that I still cannot fully explain. I know what I saw, and the only explanation I can come close to accepting is something like sleep paralysis. Even that, however, does not explain everything. If anyone has information or insight into what this could have been, I am open to hearing it. OBS. Ultra-realistic interior environment. No people, no human figures, no silhouettes, no reflections of people, a quiet, residential hallway, at night, inside a normal family house, lights on, casting, neutral, indoor, lighting, clean walls, simple doors, realistic floor textures, natural shadows, realistic depth, no cinematic exaggeration, ordinary, believable architecture, calm but unsettling, atmosphere created only by emptiness, high resolution, sharp focus, natural colors, realistic proportions, no fantasy elements, no horror creatures, no supernatural visuals, documentary-style realism, 4K quality. It was late August in Nelson, British Columbia, when my family traveled there for a rowing regatta on Kootenay Lake. My sister Elizabeth, my father and I drove our old Dodge Dakota along narrow mountain roads toward the town. The air was warm, and a light haze from distant wildfires hung over the hills, carrying a dry, smoky scent mixed with pine. Mountains rose around us like silent sentinels, growing darker as daylight faded. Pine, cedar, maple oak, and aspen trees blended together, their leaves rustling softly as sunlight filtered through the canopy in long, slanted beams across the highway. Nelson appeared almost suddenly, a small town pressed between water and mountains, both picturesque and strangely imposing. Historic brick and stone buildings lined the narrow streets, their faded signs showing traces of older names. Flower baskets swayed gently from iron lampposts. There was charm in the air, but beneath it lingered something watchful, as if the town itself noticed our arrival. The Hume Hotel stood above Baker Street, its century-old brick exterior catching the last light of evening. It felt like a building from another time, its dark windows reflecting the sky like unblinking eyes. We were tired and eager for dinner, yet I remember feeling the building itself, a subtle pressure settling in my chest the moment we entered. Our room had 2 queen beds with the bathroom door facing us and dividing the space. My sister and I shared the bed on the left, while my father took the one on the right. The bathroom created a narrow separation, making the room feel oddly isolating. We unpacked quietly, taking turns in the bathroom. My father finished first and left to meet our rowing coach, Martin, in the lobby, while my sister straightened her hair in the bathroom and I sat at the desk writing a letter to my boyfriend, soft clicking of the hair iron marking the silence. That was when I heard the first knock. It was polite and deliberate, 3 firm taps, just enough to make me think my father had forgotten his key. I opened the door and found the hallway completely empty, stretching in both directions, silent and still, with no doors open and no sound of movement. I closed the door and told myself my sister must have bumped something in the bathroom. When she came out ready to leave, I said I would follow shortly, and she left with her key. Alone again, I finished sealing the envelope when a second knock came, louder and more insistent, sending a cold unease down my spine. My sister had her key, and my father was with Martin. There was no reason for anyone to knock. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing, then opened the door slightly and looked again, but the hallway remained empty and silent. My heart raced as I stepped back into the room, telling myself I was imagining things before grabbing my bag and hurrying downstairs. Dinner at Mike's place felt warm and grounding. We laughed with Martin, and the normal rhythm of the evening pushed my earlier discomfort aside. Afterward, my father and Martin went to the lounge, while my sister and I returned to our room, where we climbed into bed, relaxed and tired. That was when the faint scratching began from inside the bathroom wall, at first sounding like small animals moving through the structure. We whispered to each other, convincing ourselves that was all it was, until we eventually fell into an uneasy sleep. I dreamed heavily, but woke feeling unrested, the images gone, leaving only a weight in my chest. My sister looked pale as she told me she heard footsteps pacing back and forth outside our door. During the night, when we asked our father, he laughed, saying his CPAP machine drowned out everything. The next day passed calmly as we spent it at the lake preparing boats and getting ready for the races. Later, we explored the town with teammates, and Nelson felt bright and welcoming, far removed from the quiet tension of the hotel that night. After a team dinner, we returned to our room, and opened the door to a sight that stopped us cold. Every pillow in the room, from the beds and chairs, had been arranged into a perfect circle on my father's bed, and in the center, a long, cylindrical pillow stood upright, balanced in a way that made no sense. The mattress was soft, yet the pillow remained standing. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then my father sighed and began putting the pillows back, saying, "It must have been housekeeping, and we were too tired to argue." That night, I did not sleep as I listened to footsteps, pacing the hallway outside our door, moving back and forth without pause. The next morning, race day, we left the hotel early, spending the entire day at the lake, exhausted but relieved, staying out late, celebrating still every time we returned to the Hume. My sister and I felt it again, an invisible pressure, the sense that something unseen disapproved of our presence, as if the walls were slowly closing in. On our final morning after breakfast at the hotel restaurant, curiosity overcame us, and we asked our server if the hotel was haunted. Her expression changed, not to amusement, but recognition, as she spoke of renovations triggering activity of a housekeeper whose cleaning cart was thrown down the hallway, and of guests describing unseen hands leaving marks where no one stood. It was strangely comforting to know we were not alone. And when we finally left the hotel and drove out of Nelson, the town looked peaceful, just as it had when we arrived, but the feeling stayed with me, the certainty that the Hume Hotel had been watching us the entire time, and that whatever lingered there had not yet finished its story. I went back and forth for years about sharing this story, and even now, I am keeping everything anonymous and vague, because I never wanted it connected to me or my family, and I only ever spoke about it with close relatives. This happened when I was very young, but old enough to remember everything clearly, and my family is Christian and believes in God, and while I did not understand much at the time, as I grew older, I began to see what happened as something spiritual and deeply wrong. At the time, we lived in a house where the living room and kitchen were one open space, and there was an old family desktop computer in the living room near the television. One night while my parents were home and all of us were in the same area, my older sister was on the computer watching one of those jump scare videos that were popular back then, and she called me over to watch. I got scared, laughed, and went back to playing. A moment later, she called another one of my sisters over without warning, and I was not watching the screen directly, but suddenly I heard my sister scream with everything she had. And when I turned toward her, she was shaken violently, and my mother rushed to her immediately and grabbed her while my father began yelling, asking what she had shown her, and the situation escalated fast. My sister continued shaking uncontrollably, and then without warning, her body went completely limp, with her arms falling down at her sides. And I remember the look on my mother's face, a level of fear I had never seen before, as she called our pastor in the middle of the night, saying we needed to see him immediately. And while my father got the car ready, my mother sent me into a bedroom with my sister. I sat beside her on the bed, holding her hand, trying to comfort her. The only way I knew, whispering that everything would be okay. And what still haunts me is how cold she was, not just cold hands, but a coldness that did not feel alive. And years later, after attending funerals, I realized it felt exactly like touching someone who had already died. As I held her hand, she suddenly turned her head toward me, far too fast, and stared directly into my eyes, and her eyes were completely black. And in that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense that whatever I was looking at was not my sister, but somehow still was. And as I got older, I began to believe she was possessed at that moment. We drove to the church and went inside, and a teenage helper tried to comfort her and gently touched her hands, but the moment she looked at him, he backed away and ran to get the pastor, and we were taken into the main area of the church, where my parents told me everything was fine, even though I knew it was not. I sat behind my father as the pastor and others began praying over my sister, rebuking whatever was inside her in the name of God. And when my sister began screaming, it did not sound like her voice at all, because it was deep, distorted, and completely unfamiliar, and she kept screaming that it hurt again and again, even though later she told me she was not in pain, and that whatever was inside her was the one screaming. At some point, my father picked me up and tried to block my view, telling me not to look, but I looked anyway, and I saw my sister contorting, crawling, and moving in ways that did not look human or natural, and I remember holding onto my father, frozen with fear. And after that night, no one ever spoke about what happened, as if silence itself was the only way the family knew how to survive it. Years later, when I was older, I finally asked my sister what had happened, and she told me that when she watched the video, she felt something jump into her body and everything went dark, and she felt like she was watching herself from outside, and she said she could see herself and also see what was inside her. She also told me that when she turned and looked at me that night, she was terrified that whatever possessed her would go after me next. And when the prayers finally ended, she said she suddenly felt herself snap back into her body, exhausted, terrified, and afraid it could happen again. To this day, she barely talks about it and only says it was the worst experience of her life. And I am not trying to convince anyone of anything, because I only know what I saw, what I felt, and how clearly this memory has stayed with me. And as a Christian, I believe this was something spiritual, something dark, and something I have never been able to forget or fully explain.